Good afternoon, folks, and welcome to today's Landcare Australia's webinar. As you'll be aware, over the last 12 months, we've been running up to the Landcare conference. We've been bringing a series of webinars and topics from the conference streams that are going to be presented in August this year. Today, we present webinar 3 in the Landcare Farming Program series. Before we get started, I'd like to offer acknowledgement of country. As you're aware, Landcare and its commitment to reconciliation, and especially as we're gathering here today to discuss environmental best management practice and programs that support the health and well-being of the landscape and its people, we'd like to offer our acknowledgement of country. Wherever you've joined in today, I'd like you to take a moment to reflect and acknowledge the traditional owners of the country you're sitting on, those who've been before you, those present and those emerging. I'd like to recognise and acknowledge their leadership and ownership and management of the country. Today I'm on Gubbi country in southeast Queensland, and we pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging. Now today we've got an excellent presentation, a very topical one about natural capital accounting. Our first speaker today is Dr. Adrian Ward, the CEO of Accounting for Nature, and the task of building one of the most scientifically credible natural capital accounting standards. As CEO for Accounting for Nature, he's playing a leading role in supporting organisations and individuals to measure the environmental condition of their assets and on a property or a region or even a catchment level. So before we get into the discussion and hear from Adrian, we're going to just a little bit of housekeeping. We'll have some time at the end of the presentation for some questions. So if you'd like to ask a question or provide some comments throughout the session, I'd like you to type them. So if you're signed into Landcarer platform already, you can just simply type your comments in the box underneath this webinar screen. If you're watching in full screen mode, you're going to have to minimise the screen to see that comments box. If you're not signed into Landcarer, well, I'm pretty disappointed, you should be. Please sign into Landcarer if you can. That'd be great. And if you haven't signed in, don't do it now because you'll miss Adrian's presentation. What we'll get you to do, any questions, comments or issues, just email hither@landcarer.com.au. That's HITHER, hi there, at Landcarer, LANDCARER.com.au. Hi there at landcarer.com.au, and the tech support and comments can be provided through that address. If you're on Landcarer and you're having a bit of an issue, something bursts into flames or you can't work something out, right down on the bottom side of the screen there's a green help button. Push that and you'll have live support to help you with any questions. Now, these webinars, the conference, the Landcare Farming Program, are brought to you, are funded through the Australian Government's National Landcare Program, and we thank them very much for that support. A lot of the work that Landcare does nationally cannot be done without that support, so we thank you for that support. Now, what we're here for today is to talk to Adrian about natural capital accounting. Welcome, Adrian. Thank you for taking your time away today. Thank you very much. I know you're a very busy bloke. Welcome.
Thanks very much, Mick. Really a delight to be here, and I think it's fair to say that everyone's pretty damn busy with COVID, bizarrely, and just doesn't seem like to be a minute in the day when things are not taken up at the moment, which I think is a fantastic thing. Feels like a moment in time, I suppose, for the natural capital sort of environment space, where things are really heating up. And despite being on the very, some would call it boring side, an unsexy side of things, being accounting, accounting is incredibly necessary to actually invest in natural capital and environmental projects. And that's what I really want to talk to you about today. So thanks for the opportunity, and also thanks for the opportunity of being part of the broader Landcare community to deliver this webinar today. So I thought I might start out by providing a bit of a, I suppose, an introduction to Accounting for Nature. And for those of you who haven't heard about us, we've been around in some form or another for about 12 or 13 years now. We were originally a framework developed by the Wentworth Group of Concerned Scientists, which many of you on the other end of the line will probably know about. And the whole idea is that from year to year, the government would put out a report and a set of metrics which would show the trend in condition over time for different environmental assets. So be they native vegetation, water, be they mammals, birds, marine ecosystems. Really what we've been missing for a very, very long time in Australia and pretty much everywhere in the world is actually being able to track condition over time and see if it's going up or down, if the health of the environment's going up or down. And it's not dissimilar in many respects to financial accounting, where, of course, from year to year, you want to know your profit and loss. You want to know how things are tracking so you can make investments or you can pull investment out or whatever it might be. And so without that for the environment, we don't really know from year to year or over the broader long-term trend on how things are going, and therefore where the best places to put money into are, and also to get feedback on how well it's doing, you know, for native vegetation on farms or even in a region, as Mick alluded to before. And so Accounting for Nature was devised by Peter Cozier, the former director of Wentworth Group and now our chair at Accounting for Nature, to provide a replicable, scalable, you know, incredible way to report consistently through time on the condition of the environment. And so that's what we're here to try and do. We're a not-for-profit, and really our key metric is impact, and getting as many people as possible to use Accounting for Nature, right from, you know, the farmer landholder level right up to your corporates, to use it for whatever various purposes that they might want to use it for, but all consistently so that we're all measuring changes in the environment in the same way. The other side of things is that we also, if you do that, principally what we do as a business is that we put a stamp, like you see there in the bottom left-hand corner, on your environmental account to basically say it's not greenwashing and it's been done to the Accounting for Nature standard. And then you can wave it high in the sky to basically quantify what you're using the environmental account for. So, you know, whether it's for seeking government money, and I'll go into a lot more of this in detail shortly, but seeking government money, private investment, or simply just tracking the condition of environmental assets on your farm. There's a variety of purposes that you can use Accounting for Nature for. So really, usually you have summaries at the end, but I thought I'd just flick it up at the start just so we can set the context. So what we do is, so Accounting for Nature is an environmental accounting and certification framework. So most people, they can pick up Accounting for Nature now and do it for free, and they don't need to actually go to certification where we give them the big tick. They might just want to pick it up and use it anyway, and maybe in the future they might want to be certified, for example. But for those who do want to go into the certification, they pay a small fee to actually get certified by us, which keeps us running, and then they can use the Accounting for Nature tick for their various purposes. The second piece of this summary, which I'll go into more detail, is the econ. So the central reporting metric for Accounting for Nature is the econ, which is basically a score from 0 to 100, 100 being, you know, the most pristine landscape that you can get to, right down to 0, which is your most degraded. And basically, it's a great communication tool because you can show an econ for a soil or native fauna or vegetation or whatever it might be, and tracking it through time. And intuitively, most people understand that a 0 is probably not good, 100 is fantastic, and somewhere in between. And if it's going up, then that graph in particular is a very powerful piece to put up in front of investors or government or whoever it might be, to show that what you're doing on the land is actually making impact. So that's the econs, and we will talk about the econs more. So the whole idea is that when Accounting for Nature certifies an environmental account that you might build, is that then you can take it to, you know, governments, aggregators and other organisations to make scientifically defensible claims, around environmental sustainability claims to investors and stakeholders. The other thing to note now, so this is very much akin to the carbon accounting journey, and carbon accounting started in Australia, good probably 15, 20 years ago, when people started, I guess, producing spreadsheets and trying to work out what their carbon footprint was for the purposes of carbon offset projects or going carbon neutral and all those sorts of things. 20 years later, obviously, we're so much more sophisticated around counting carbon and then monetizing carbon. We've got arguably a very mature market in Australia and globally for that. And of course, the Paris Agreement is going to lead to some very, very big changes and incentives throughout the world to do more of that. But we don't have currently, though, is other than carbon, a standardized way to, again, track the condition and change in condition for other environmental assets, as aforementioned. So for soil health and vegetation health, etc. And so this is sort of, I guess, the void we are somewhat trying to fill, is that you have your carbon accounting, and then more broadly, this natural capital accounting or environmental accounting, which you also do and you put together, and some people would call it credit stacking or stapling co-benefits or carbon plus onto the carbon. That's sort of where we sit. We're not so much focused on the carbon side, although it is something that we bring into our framework. We're focused on everything else, which is kind of the next frontier of where environmental markets are evolving to, and evolving quite fast. And then to summarise the summary, basically, if you don't measure the condition of natural capital, you can't manage it better, you can't prove your positive impact, and you can't invest it in it. And so that's sort of the focus of the presentation today. So going back to a comment just before, there is a global challenge where we do have a lack of an accounting system for environmental health, and again, a quantitative metric such as the econ to actually measure change over time. We do have it for carbon. It's called TCO2E. We do have it for dollars. It might be called profit, but we don't have one for the environment. And yet, there's governments, investors, and consumers who really want something easy to understand. And again, that's where we're playing, and that's where the econ comes in. And then, as you can see by my pretty little graph there, 0 to 100 with the little tree and the arrow going up. Ideally, if you're showing that arrow going up over time, that's something very, very powerful that you can show to your stakeholders, and particularly if it's stamped with the Accounting for Nature certification mark. Environmental Condition Index, or the econ, basically allows us to compare the relative condition of different environmental assets from one to another in different places. It also allows us to aggregate different types and scales of information. So if you have a bunch of farms, across a regional NRM body area, you could aggregate that up to the regional level, and if you had enough information and data, you could bring that further up to the state, national, international level. Obviously, it's a long way into the horizon, but it's something that we are trying to aim towards. So it can be aggregated. Here's a very brief snapshot, and I guess putting something like this on a webinar is probably not the best thing to do, but it's worth just showing it very briefly to show that we're basically aligning Accounting for Nature with international financing systems and processes and auditing processes. One of that's through an asset table. So you're showing basically, how things are changing over time from one and for your different asset types. So in this case, just give you an idea of what we're talking about with a sort of sub-asset class. So the asset class would be fresh water, for example, or it might be marine. And in this case, it's mainly marine, probably a little freshwater upstream. But you can see that's broken down into the assets for SEQ region, and being the Albert River, the Bremer, and the Brisbane. And so those are your assets. And under that, we have something called a reference benchmark, which is often 100, which is what you think the best condition of a river might be, and then what the actual current condition is today, and how you want to project it forward and track it with the econ in accordance with different indicators. So for the Bremer and these other estuaries and rivers, we have a chemical index, we have biological health rating, and we have foreshore riparian habitat zones. Those are scored with reference to, for riparian habitat condition of that riparian habitat and also the extent. And, if both these things improve, then the current score econ of 22 for the Bremer would ideally go up over time as you improve things and you replanted, veg and whatever it might be. So again, the whole idea is providing feedback on your management actions. And then through the balance sheet is actually showing how those have changed through time. And again, this is what a lot of stakeholders are interested in. They're really interested, not necessarily in a point of time, and that is often very, very difficult to interpret, because environmental change and condition takes quite some time to improve, as many of you all appreciate. And you don't actually start seeing that change for 5-10 years later. And that's what we're really focused on, is quantifying those 2 points, but also the trend and condition in between, the econ, and how the econ has changed. And the power of trend, and this is, I suppose this is sort of the crux of it, really, is that this is looks like a very, very simple graph. There's a lot of numbers and indicators and methods that sit behind this. But I think what most people can understand is that this particular account, and this is a real account, and this is for Kilter Rural down in, who's got, I think, 40 or so farms down near Bendigo, down in Victoria. They started with an econ for their native vegetation of around 11 in 2007. They hindcast their data and worked it out. And then in 2018, they did another account, and they worked out what's gone up to 21, roughly, with all the efforts they put into replanting and taking weeds out and things like that. And their idea is then for 2022, they're actually projecting out where they think they'll be. And you might notice here, and again, context is everything sometimes, is that, they're a productive landscape, and they will never, if they want to keep producing food for native vegetation, they won't be able to get right back to 100 or pre-European, because they need land aside to, produce food, and therefore their score will stay down. But having said that, we have another metric which is not included in here called the PCON, which is Productive Condition Index. And that basically shows that it's another line on this graph, and it would show that their productive condition is getting better at the same time as vegetation is improving. And the whole idea is that you're showing that both ecological and financial outcomes are going up together. And with that trend, that information, you can access premiums, continue access new existing markets, access new environmental markets, which are springing up all around the world. And environmental markets can take many forms. They could be a stackable credit that you put on top of carbon. They could be simply that you're selling a product, a can of tomatoes, and you're getting a premium because there's a higher sustainability benefit. Whatever it might be accessing the Land Restoration Fund in Queensland, or it might be some of the other funds that are sort of starting to spring up in government around the other states. But the same idea it rings true for all these, is that the trend is the way that you quantify that what you're doing is actually having a real impact, and you're not greenwashing, and it's all backed by auditable numbers. So the process by which you do this, just at a very high level, and you engage through the Accounting for Nature framework to access these markets, is that you might have a farmer, a landholder, maybe an investor who wants to actually look down and see across the portfolio how things are looking, such as banks, governments. They all want to prove sustainability claims or test sustainability claims. And so they build an environmental account for a property, a project, or a region, which is aligned to financial accounting to track the condition over time. And then those accounts would be audited by Accounting for Nature. And then again, you would take those accounts as the way, from a due diligence perspective, to I suppose, satisfy those claims that you're making to the market, and then get paid or whatever it might be. So again, Accounting for Nature is very much about certifying the scientific evidence behind what you're using it for to prove a claim. So we have a 5-step process to develop and certify an environmental account, and I'll just run through this very briefly. Firstly, you design your account internally. You work out what environmental assets on your particular property or region that you might want to include. And then that might also include selecting or creating new measurement and monitoring methods to actually measure the condition of those assets. And I'll get to that in a moment too. And then once you've sort of got a broad idea of what you're going to do and what the scope is, then you register it with Accounting for Nature in our public registry. Then we basically say to you, that's sort of our quality check gate. And we say, okay, yep, good, it's in line with all our processes and procedures and standards. Then you go ahead and build your environmental account, you calculate your econ, you submit it to us with an independent audit if required. That's generally not required for smallholders. And then you submit it for certification, and then basically you get the right to use the Accounting for Nature trust mark, as you can see there. So yeah, I just re-emphasize this again. Accounting for Nature certifies environmental account projects against the Accounting for Nature standard and the method that you've chosen to use to develop your environmental account. As I sort of alluded to before, we work across a number of assets, and 6 in particular. So soil, native fauna, water, marine, native vegetation, and carbon. And so these methods cater for different environmental asset classes. And currently we've got 8. We've got 8 methods approved for you under the Accounting for Nature network framework, and we're looking at about 3 or 4 more going through in the next few weeks around fauna and water. But the other thing to note is that we totally understand that many people might not have the capacity or the budget to go out there and do what we call level 1 method. Now, level 1 method is very high confidence. It would give you an econ accuracy of around 95%. It would be used really if you're trading natural capital offsets or environmental offsets or some very sophisticated environmental market instrument. That's what it's generally reserved for. And at the end of the day, most people probably can't do that. Particularly if you're a family farm, individual landholder, or a small business, it's just way too much effort to go to probably do all the testing and everything that goes along with that, going out into the field, getting field observations, etc., and doing GIS. And so largely that is reserved for those very high value instruments, particularly, and where, for example, you might be getting paid to do it, a lot of money to do it, such as the Land Restoration Fund. There's millions and millions and millions of dollars on the line there, and totally understand why the Queensland government would want a high level precision to actually get there before they pay out any public funding. So that's really important to note. But at the other end is level 3, and level 3 is very much been designed for landholders to actually go out and just get into environmental accounting and start measuring the condition of environmental assets within their constraints of budget and capacity and time and all that. And so there is a huge difference between a level 1 and level 3 in actually executing that method. Level 3, I think, to give an example for native vegetation, would involve, for example, going out, sending up a couple of star pickets. And my apologies to our science officer, I'm probably simplifying this a little bit, but it is fairly simple, is that you go out, put some star pickets out, take some photos of your trees that might be there, year on year, estimate your tree height, record that, geo-reference that, and that's kind of your account done for native vegetation. And so, yeah, the whole idea is that that would be a lot more accessible than a level 1. And level 3 is still high enough, 80% accuracy, to get you the Accounting for Nature certification tick. So I just want to make that very, very clear that methods can vary for asset types, for different purposes, and also different confidence levels. And so really what we're trying to do is that we're trying to open up Accounting for Nature to anyone to do, but we're still treading that fine line between cost, accessibility, and also scientific rigor, because at the end of the day, we've still got to put our hands on our hearts and be able to say that that's a pretty credible account that someone's produced. The other thing to say about environmental assets that we work across, and I did mention this before, is we're largely focused on assets other than carbon, because there's already plenty of carbon offset methodologies out there developed by the Commonwealth Government, Verra, Gold Standard, and others. And that is not our core business, but our core business is very much filling in similar types of methods, again, for those other assets that we've got there, and then providing a way where you can plug those, the benefits that you derive, that you measure from those through the econ against the carbon standards, if that makes sense. And really, very much we're playing on that environmental co-benefits, carbon plus nature-based solutions side of the market, to really bring up the standard alongside carbon that's already being done. So that's really important. But we do still classify carbon as a key environmental asset, of course, which has commonalities across most of those assets you can see there. All right, so there's a quick snapshot of the methods. Sorry, we've got 7 currently listed. So you need a method to do, you need an accredited method to do an environmental count under Accounting for Nature. You can either download one from our website, and so if you jump on that website there, you can see them all. Some of them you can download. So there's some that are open source, and if you look at the bottom of that graph, and it might be a little bit hard to see, there's 2 that have been co-developed with Landcare, one for native veg and one for these are both ready to be downloaded and used. You don't have to pay for them at all. There's a couple of others done by the Land Restoration Fund that are also free to download. There's also a number there that are not free to download and not readily able to be downloaded because they've been developed by third parties such as CO2 Australia and Green Collar and others. And the reason is that obviously those organisations have spent quite a bit of time putting the IP in to actually develop those methods, and so they get 1 year's grace or embargo on their methods before they become open source. And that doesn't mean you can't use them. You can still request to use them, and then we ask them if you can use them and have a look. But it's a subject of negotiation, but they will become eventually free to download as well. But there's also the other option is that if none of these would suit your particular project, you can develop your own. And if you choose to do that, it needs to go through Accounting for Nature's Standards and Accreditation Committee, who will work with you to get that up to a high enough level that it's producing econ relative to the confidence level that you've selected or nominated. So that's the method process. I'm sort of keeping an eye on all these questions that are coming through in the back corner. Thanks, Alexi and Mick. So a few to get back to shortly. We might leave that to the end, actually, I think, if that's okay. And the other thing we do, so we accredit methods, we certify accounts. We also accredit experts to basically develop or build environmental accounts for other people or themselves. We sort of came to this field and realization that there wasn't a lot of consistency in the expertise of people doing environmental accounting, and there's certainly many ways that you can possibly do it. That's fair to say. But we thought, well, what's really critical in this space is some sort of capacity building program, and so we have developed an online environmental account training system, and you can jump on there. You can do a course over the course of about 8 hours at your own pace. And then you can apply to be accredited and listed on the Accounting for Nature website as an accredited expert. And the reason for this, and this is a list of our current accredited experts, and it works very similar to, if anyone's ever seen the Commonwealth Government have Emissions Reduction Fund and National Greenhouse Energy Reporting list of auditors. So it's very, very similar to that. It's a public list that you can go to and find people to do auditing or build your carbon account. Well, this is the same thing, but it's for environmental accounting. So these are all the people who have gone through our training, who are available to help do consultancies and help you build environmental account. Accounting for Nature doesn't build environmental accounts because, of course, we've got to stay arm's length from that and independently certify. But these are the people that you might want to call to help to get your account done. Or, of course, you can do it yourself. You don't have to be accredited as an expert to do an environmental account. You don't have to use someone on here who's an accredited expert. We just suggest you do, because you know then that they've been trained to the standard. In terms of our partners, and I'll flip up a list of our registered projects in just a moment, but we work with a number of people and organisations from the conservation organisations such as Bush Heritage, Queensland Trust for Nature, Tassie Land Conservancy, and Landcare as an NGO, right through to NRM regions such as BMRG, and also the carbon aggregators and sort of impact investment focused agricultural organisations such as Green Coal CO2 Australia and Kilter Rural and Impact Ag Group. Working with some of the smaller farmers such as Gundekin Pastoral Company, which is west of Bundaberg in Queensland, and also now through the Landcare project, quite a number of farmers and landholders across Australia, which is super exciting. Also working with some of the large international funds such as Pollination, HSBC, and of course research organisations such as CSIRO. And just to give you sort of a bit of a flavour, I suppose, of the things that Accounting for Nature is being used for. So Kilter Rural, and they've got a sizable portfolio of at least $500 million these days. And they're very much using, developing environmental accounts and getting certified by Accounting for Nature to use those accounts to attract impact investment and grow their business, because certainly finding there's a lot of call, and again, particularly after COVID, it's gone crazy in that big investors are reshaping their portfolios around sustainability in a big way, and of course, a big part of that is ecological performance, and so Kilter's using Accounting for Nature to prove their ecological performance. So to an ever increasingly sophisticated market out there who are, very much skeptical now that you can't just put a picture of a koala or something on your front page of your environmental impact statement or whatever it might be. You've actually got to really start thinking about tracking the condition over time, and that's sort of where the market in a whole is moving towards. It might take a few more years or so, but it's certainly getting towards that, like carbon has been. Land Restoration Fund. So Accounting for Nature is the chosen framework for quantifying environmental co-benefits on site of carbon for the Land Restoration Fund in Queensland. So as many of you know, the LRF is effectively a state-based buyer of Australian carbon credit units or carbon offsets from projects in Queensland. But on top of that, there's an extra incentive, is that if you use Accounting for Nature to prove that there's additional environmental benefits, they'll pay you more money, and quite a bit more money. And so it's a fantastic incentive program, and certainly world leading in the natural capital market space. Tasmanian Land Conservancy, they're using it to track the regeneration of bushfire damaged land, which happened in 2019. And again, showing that the recon's improving across native vegetation and for mammals, and also, coincidentally, better water quality in rivers and whatnot, and wetlands. They're also using a bit of technology to do that, and I'll talk about technology as well shortly. At the regional scale, about 6 or 7 years ago, Wentworth Group did a regional scale trial across 10 NRM regions in Australia, and to work out if this would work at the regional scale, and it did. And but as things are a bit cyclical with government sometimes, things sort of chopped and changed, and so it wasn't carried on. Although we're now seeing that the Burnett Mary Regional Group is really spearheading a push to get this done in a really, I guess, in-depth way across all different asset types. And so Accounting for Nature is really proudly to be associated with those guys and helping them to get the first regional scale account up under Accounting for Nature and certified in the next 6 to 12 months. And that in doing so, the reason they're using it is very much to show government that when government money comes in, whether it's for the reef or whether it's for terrestrial and other purposes, that the investment is making, a real, I guess, impact on the econ, and therefore the econ showing that that what they're doing has had real environmental impacts on the ground. So that's pretty exciting. So currently across Australia, we've got about 20 environmental account projects currently underway. What's obviously missing here is 3 states. But there is some really exciting projects, can't talk too much about at the moment, which are kicking off in WA and spanning into the Northern Territory, and so also some really interesting stuff going on in South Australia. So we're very much hoping that in the next 3 to 6 months, we're going to see a lot more dots on that page. We've certainly been inundated with a lot of interest. Now it's just a question of scaling it across Australia, and certainly our ambition is to take Accounting for Nature well beyond Australia and to the world. So just where we currently are at the moment. So it's currently being used as market trust and scientific credibility to prove sustainability claims for new products and investment opportunities, covering around about $700 million asset under management, and in the pipeline about 3.5 million hectares of land. And we think, and also, so that's private sector, and then $500 million through public sector money, which is using to inform investment. We're hoping by the end of this year, we're increasing that to about $1 billion worth of assets under management that Accounting for Nature is covering, and around 50 million hectares of the Australian continent. And so, some of this is obviously quite ambitious, and I still think we can certainly get there. But often it takes more time than you think, but we're giving it a go, ironing out a lot of crinkles along the way, and we're certainly finding that that is certainly achievable. Internationally is a very big space for us that we're considering. Accounting for Nature is compatible with various UN standards, such as the such as SEA, which stands for Environmental Economic Accounting, and also the Sustainable Development Goals. We're also looking more broadly into the GIN, Global Impact Investing Network's IRIS metrics, aligning with the CBD and AEG targets, and various other programs that are going on at the international level. And that's incredibly important to us, because we certainly see the future in the next 5 to 10 years is that people will be reporting similar probably to the AEG and Task Force for Nature-Based Financial Disclosures and other systems, just like they're reporting under the Paris Agreement now. It's sort of the next big thing in the pipeline, so we're very cognizant of that. I'm almost at the end of my presentation, and I'll open up for questions. But a few last things to say is that we're certainly not trying to compete with other standards. I think it's really important to say. We're trying to create something that's complementary. We're not trying to say your farm is sustainable or whatnot. We're trying to create a system that you basically build an environmental account, we stamp it, and then you use that to justify your claims in whatever sphere, whatever program that might be. It doesn't have to be in one program versus another. Again, Wentworth Group and now Accounting for Nature has always been focused on the credibility of the science and also the pragmatics of applying the science, and that's certainly what Accounting for Nature is about these days. So the Landcare Farming Natural Capital Accounting project is very, very exciting, because it is the first time that we have tried to scale Accounting for Nature at the farming producer level. And so we've had tremendous support by Landcare with development of those 2 methods I mentioned previously. We're in the process of training about 250 producers and advisors across Australia on natural capital environmental accounting, and give them the tools such as those 2 methods to actually go out and do that. Very much complements carbon accounting workshops that Landcare is also doing. And the whole idea is to help producers quantify their impact through audible metrics on improving natural capital. And then so they can make claims around sustainability for various purposes, whether it's a government grant or whether it might be, for instance, an investor who wants to come in or someone who wants to buy their products. And it's very much supported by our self-paced course and coaching advisory. And so in that context, I suppose, who is environmental accounting for? Well, it's for a very, very broad segment of the market. It's for farmers, for landholders, It's for agribusiness who've got a lot more capacity to do this. It's also for investors to look down and look at what their portfolio of projects is doing. It's also for corporates and supply chains. It's for government when they're handing out grants and when they're trying to measure, Australia's progress towards international targets or whatever it might be, for instance. And it's also for not-for-profits to access philanthropy and manage the land better. And we support it through a number of ways. We don't build environment accounts, just to re-emphasise that. We train and accredit people to do that. We coach and advise to a certain extent, people to get them started on environment account, but we don't actually build it for them. And we will be providing soon an online environmental account building platform. And really our ambition is that there'll be a click of a button, get your environmental account type scenario that anyone can jump in and produce an environmental account without too much cost and hassle, at least a level 3 account. That's where we really want to go to really open it up to the market and make it easy, make it routine, make it cost effective for people to do. Because at the end of the day, that's the only way we're going to achieve scale. And why do environmental accounting? So the last slide, I think, for me, pretty much, is that, again, just to hammer home, to verify environmental co-benefits and underpin new markets, to better manage your land, support sustainability claims in general, track investment performance, and also support the innovation of government policy and public finance. For example, towards performance-based grants, for instance. On that last note, of course, we all want more money to do things, without a doubt. But the reality of the world, particularly with COVID now, is that government budgets are very tight. And very much it's coming towards bang for buck. Same with the private sector. And so investors, whether private or public, they want more bang for buck. They want sustainability outcomes, social, environmental, and they want to see evidence of that. And so, again, that's what we're trying to support. So last slide, again, I want to finish on that point I made before. If you don't measure the condition of natural capital, you can't manage it better, you can't prove your positive impact, and you can't invest in it. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Adrian. That's an excellent session. And I challenge anyone to say that accounting isn't cool now. It's got everything, hasn't it? I guess from my perspective as an outsider, just having just started with Landcare, it seems that natural capital accounting has been designed for what Landcare does. It talks to the ethos, it talks to the networks, it talks to our core business. I think speaking on behalf, or speaking to the Landcare members and the groups that are listening today, this opportunity provides a platform for us to use our local knowledge, our local skills, our past efforts in the landscape to justify good practice, social license and stewardship stuff. So thank you very much for that, Adrian. It's been good. I really appreciate the time and effort you put into that presentation. Just in case you weren't aware, Adrian alluded to it in a little bit of detail there. We do have a project underway at the moment. We've got have an EOI out now. The Landcare program in that partnership is looking at establishing these hubs. We do have a few gaps in the hub at the moment. We are basically working on these hubs of having 10 groups of 10 producers creating their own footprint and then using Adrian's tools. So if you're keen to have a look at it or want to discuss more about it, you can go into Landcarer or you can contact me directly. This presentation and the email will be sent around post webinar. But I really think it really does, it provides Landcare, established Landcare and individual Landcare as an opportunity to really showcase what they are doing different and why they are good stewards of the land. I think that's really important. The bit that I really liked was the discussion, the opportunity to provide a baseline of what we're doing, where the money's going and what we're actually achieving. So very exciting times. I haven't seen any more questions come in. I think that's pretty much it. So we're just pushing up to the 45-minute mark. So I'd like to say thank you very much for your time and effort, Adrian. It's been great to hear from you. Listeners, if there's an opportunity to participate, if you'd like to have a discussion about that with me, I strongly encourage you to join Landcarer. The Landcare Farming Program uses Landcarer as its primary source of contact and information. In the very near future, all the projects that we're doing will be pushing out through that to showcase what we're doing and how others can be involved in it. So if you're not a member of the Landcare Farming Program on Landcarer yet, I strongly advise you to do that. All our other projects are on there as well, and in particular the Landcare conference that's coming up down in Sydney, and tickets are open for it now. It's an exciting product with a couple of days of hearing from presenters such as Adrian and across a broad range of spectrums that Landcare works in. So I strongly encourage you to sign up if you've got the opportunity and attend. But thank you very much. As I said, an email will come around this afternoon with this link to the recording and also a link to Landcarer. So thanks for your time. Thanks, Adrian. Thanks, everybody. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.